It's my pleasure to invite up tonight's darshan, tonight's speaker, Donnovan Yisrael. He is among many other things, he is the chair of our Racial Equity and Justice Committee. He's also taught at Beth Am and is an all-around fantastic person. Come on up, Donnovan.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
And hine matov, which for those of you who do not understand Hebrew, as I don't, it is translated loosely as, behold how good and pleasing it is to not be on Zoom. It's a loose translation. And we also welcome those who are joining us via streaming and technology tonight. The parsha for this week is Erev. This is the episode in Torah where Moses tells the Israelites that if they follow God's laws, the nations who now dwell across the Jordan River will not harm them. He reminds the people of the virtues of keeping God's commandments and says that the land of Israel will overflow with milk and honey if the people obey God's commandments and teach them to their children. I want to share a little bit with you now. When you have eaten your fill, give thanks to the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God and fail to keep his commandments, his rules and his laws, which I enjoin upon you today. When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses to live in, and your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything you own has prospered, beware lest your heart grow haughty, and you forget the Lord your God who freed you from the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its seraph, serpents, and scorpions, a parched land with no water in it, like California, who brought forth water for you from the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers had never known, in order to test you by hardships, only to benefit you in the end. And you say to yourselves, my power and might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. I'll repeat that. My own power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. Remember at that time that it is the Lord your God who gives you the power to get wealth in fulfillment of the covenant that God made on oath with your fathers, as is still the case. To me, this portion is saying that after we have availed ourselves of all the good stuff, that we should be wary of taking things for granted, taking God for granted. Ask yourselves, do I often believe that my own power and the might of my own hand have won the wealth that I have? Do we take full credit for what we have, or do we acknowledge that much, if not all, of what we have is due to the grace of God? British philosopher Alan Watts reminds us that the day of our birth is like waking up, never having gone to sleep. A miraculous gift. Beth Am member and a dear friend, Joel Orr, who I just realized, because I read The Builder, is speaking in a few weeks, taught me that the word grace refers to unearned gifts from heaven. Grace, unearned gifts from heaven. When we acknowledge the grace of God and or our privilege and a bit of luck, we practice gratitude. Both grace and gratitude come from the Latin root gratis. We must remember that what we have was gifted to us, and that by no means do all people receive such gifts. By the way, the opposite of gratitude is entitlement or unacknowledged privilege. Maybe this is what was meant by beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget the Lord your God. We are all worthy, but no one is entitled. I want to link these powerful messages to the work that we'll be doing together as part of Beth Am's Racial Equity and Justice initiatives. A few years ago, I had the honor of meeting and working alongside Dr. Harry Broad of blessed memory, a sociology professor of men's studies in Northern Iowa University, I believe, anti-sexual assault educator and author of the book, Superman is Jewish? About how many of our comic book heroes were shaped by the culture and traditions of their Jewish creators. I was delighted, he was speaking at Hillel, I believe, when I heard Dr. Broad share a fascinating perspective on the story of Passover, and that it is possibly one of the world's first graphic novels. Cool, right? And yet it got me wondering if while we are enjoying some lovely brisket and 4 glasses of kosher wine, by the way, arguably Passover is also one of the first drinking games, and reciting passages like, "We were once in bondage, slaves in Mitzrayim." I wonder when we say those things if we don't really feel the gravity, the lived reality of enslavement. I don't think we do. I don't think we can. We think of it like simply another Marvel comic or watching the animated musical Prince of Egypt, simply like it's the story in Frozen. A good story, but that's it. And I understand why we Jews with intergenerational trauma still flowing through us from the Shoah and other tragedies would not want to cognize or face the reality of enslavement in Egypt or in the United States of America. I will admit that I could not watch movies like Schindler's List I watched it the first time just a few years ago, decades after it came out, decades after I became Jewish myself. I couldn't watch it. And then George Floyd's murder was caught on camera. Graphic for sure, but no mistaking this for a graphic novel. And then I willed myself to watch 12 Years a Slave, disturbing and deeply painful. And after that, Ava DuVernay's 13th. And finally let the truth get through to my heart, which had been hardened like Pharaoh's. You see, for the most of my life, I told a story, despite being a person of color, of my immigrant parents lifting themselves up by their bootstraps as they immigrated to the U.S. in 1966 because my father was able to join the U.S. Navy in the Philippines. As the story goes, my father was underweight, which supports the bootstrapping narrative, by the way. And so he stuffed down a lot of bananas in an effort to make the 111-pound weight requirement for the Navy. I don't know if that works, by the way. Don't try that at home. I had always given my father sole credit and gratitude for these actions, much of which he deserves for sure, as his efforts paved the way for many dozens of my relatives to find homes and live a life here in America. And yet this immigrant narrative that is us saying, see, we did it, why can't you do it, pointing at other people of color or other groups in our country who have not been able to attain wealth and thrive. This is a problem. It was only in the wake of George Floyd's murder did I learn about the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. Did anybody learn about that in school? I didn't. Also known as the Hart-Celler Act, which opened the door for people with specialized skills to immigrate to the U.S. If you've ever wondered why so many nurses are Filipino, I think this has something to do with it. Also, accountants. My parents are accountants, and that was a way to get to the U.S., right? The Immigration Act of 65 had a lot to do with this. By the way, a major sidebar is that the Hart-Celler Act was partially motivated at least by the fact that the Nazis looked to U.S. governmental policy in order to shape their plans, their solutions, right? And yet I have been telling the story of how my family picked itself up by its bootstrap, which allowed me to go to a local university of high quality, meet my wife, buy a home, and have the life I have in the Bay Area. I presumed that my own power and that of my parents and the might of my own hand had won this wealth for me. Meanwhile, centuries beforehand, institutional racism is and was keeping black folks and others in cycles of violence, incarceration, depriving folks of basic rights and the ability to thrive. My family got here in the 60s and was immediately able to get military benefits, though not all Filipino servicemen did. State jobs with pensions. Do you remember that word? Pensions with a P. And the ability to buy their first home by the early 70s, which put me and my brothers through school as a machine of earning, as you know. Do people, do houses appreciate and value in this neighborhood, by the way? Maybe you don't know about that. We had been privileged by a change in the law. Fast forward to the present. This past year, members of our Racial Equity and Justice Committee, some of you are here, some of you weren't on the committee, and you did great work today. Thank you. I see you. We want you back. Have worked hard to bring you a fruitful book discussion series on Isabel Wilkerson's foundational work, Caste. Read it. a number of film screenings and discussions, as well as guest speakers on issues related to race, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our mission is to first help Beth Am to become a place that is welcoming and empowering to all people, regardless of their skin color, gender, identity, sexual orientation, ability, and on. After that, we seek to engage the world outside of Beth Am to heal from racism and to grow to be the country that is truly for all of us. But first, the work begins inside of each of us. If you feel like I do, that you and your family have eaten your fill and built fine houses to live in, and your herds and flocks, that's a metaphor, by the way, you don't have to have real flocks, have multiplied, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything you own has prospered, then we invite you to get involved in our racial equity and justice initiatives this coming year. We have learned a lot this year, and we'll be announcing some changes to our committee's structure and initiatives, so look out for those. And we invite you to get involved. Please feel free to contact me at Donnovan@stanford.edu or Rabbi Weissman through email or after services. The Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for 430 years. Black people in this country have been subject to enslavement, Jim Crow, and systematic oppression for over 400 years. It is long past time for our country to face the truth. And so if you are ready to reckon, ready to be held to account, and be counted as part of our healing, as part of healing ourselves and our country and our world, please join us. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, Donnovan. Yesher koach.